American World War II movies definitely have their own genre. They typically deal with the American sense of duty, sacrifice, and focus on a hero participating in a battle against good and evil. Vietnam War movies have their own genre too, centering on conspiracy, distrust, and moral ambiguity. But is there a genre for the Iraq War? What do Iraq War films have in common? It's certainly possible that not enough time has passed for a strong narrative about the American occupation of Iraq. But it's been 17 years since we invaded in 2003, and almost 30 years since the first Gulf War. In that same time period after the start of the Vietnam War, we had classics like Apocalypse Now and The Deer Hunter. These films had already defined the Vietnam War genre. The anti-war movement swept the US and defined the themes in films like Platoon, where the American soldiers are the antagonists. The chaos and senseless violence in the film shows us how the country felt about the war at that time. The genre elements of World War II and Vietnam War movies reflect American feelings about those conflicts. But what are the genre elements of Iraq War films? Let's see if we can find any common threads.
What's the best way to go about disarming one of these things?
The way you don't dice it.
One of the most prominent Iraq War films is Kathryn Bigelow's 2008 Best Picture winner, The Hurt Locker. It's about a reckless but prolific explosive ordnance disposal technician and his team as they count down their days until deployment is over. Sergeant James is the best of the best. He's technologically gifted, unfazed by high-stress situations, and is in and out with little to no mess. In short, he's a specialist. Iraq War films typically focus on special forces, and that's because, unlike in World War II and Vietnam, there was no draft. The draft made war something everyone had to possibly participate in, whether they wanted to or not. That's why World War II and Vietnam films tend to focus on the grunts, the enlisted infantrymen who are just cogs in a much larger machine. They are the everyman. Tom Hanks is a school teacher in Saving Private Ryan, and the main characters in The Deer Hunter are steel mill workers. These films tell the stories of average Joes who get caught up in the chaos and can't wait to go home.
You know, if going to Ramel and finding him so he can go home, if that earns me the right to get back to my wife, well then that's my mission.
In direct contrast, Iraq War films are about people who want to be there, and sometimes they actually thrive in the chaos. Without a draft, the Iraq War was more removed from everyday American life. Add in the fact that a large part of the military in the Middle East was made up of mercenary contractors, and the American army turned into a job for just a select few who chose to be there. Iraq War movies center on a warrior class of specialized units, such as in the films American Sniper, Zero Dark 30, and The Hurt Locker.
Got tools?
Got to.
All right, let's rock and roll, man.
Sergeant James in The Hurt Locker perfectly embodies the warrior class mentality of American soldiers in the Iraq War. He's a specialized elite soldier equipped to deal with the exact nature of the war. In his first scene in combat, he expertly defuses a massive roadside bomb. Right off the bat, we see he has the technical expertise that an enlisted soldier would not have. And his technical expertise applies to more than just defusing the bomb itself. Before he defuses the bomb, he also defuses a tense situation with an Iraqi civilian. The film sets up Sergeant James as a warrior soldier that can do it all. He not only defuses bombs, he also defuses conflict. So a key genre element of many Iraq War films is the painting of American soldiers as vocational, well-trained warriors that can deal with both combat and civilian occupation. American Sniper focuses on a highly specialized sniper who can spot a bad guy amongst the civilians, and other films like Lone Survivor and Zero Dark 30 exclusively show elite special forces who avoid civilian casualties. Active Valor took this fixation on specialized forces to the extreme and recruited real-life SEALs to portray themselves, clearly playing into the admiration of elite talent. The emphasis on small elite groups and their interactions with civilians makes these films feel intimate and personal. Most of these films dive into the psychology of being a soldier. Trauma is a common topic in many Iraq War films. Many of the films show the soldiers at home and the trauma that they bring with them. These films are very sympathetic to the ordeals that a soldier goes through, which contrasts the infamously poor treatment of Vietnam soldiers by the American public when they returned home. There are quite a few Iraq War films that focus heavily on the trauma of combat, like Yellowbirds, Thank You for Your Service, and American Sniper, which devotes its last act to addressing Chris Kyle's post-traumatic stress disorder. Spending more time on the psychological effects of war shows America's new understanding of mental illness, and contrasts with earlier war films that either overlooked trauma, resolved it easily, or went to the extreme and showed soldiers as just psychotic. But highlighting the trauma of American soldiers and limiting the scope of the film to a specialized few has a secondary effect. It ends up avoiding broader questions about whether the Iraq War was justified in the first place. Like many Iraq War films, The Hurt Locker treats America's presence in the war as fact and does not question the war in any meaningful way. And another film that also overlooks the morality of the Iraq War is the most successful Iraq War movie, American Sniper.
I was just protecting my guys. They were trying to kill our soldiers, and I'm willing to meet my creator and answer for every shot that I took.
Chris Kyle is the prime example of a dutiful soldier. In the film, he's motivated exclusively by a desire to protect the lives of his teammates. He's willing to put himself in extremely dangerous situations if it means he can save lives.
I'm gonna go clear houses with Marines.
And though these experiences cause him trauma, the film ultimately tells us it's worth it because he saved American lives.
Your dad, he's a hero.
On the surface, this stance appears apolitical because Kyle is just protecting soldiers in dangerous situations. But did those soldiers have to be there in the first place? Earlier in the film, Chris Kyle's dad lectures him on the importance of using violence to protect others. And while he lectures, the film cuts to Chris as a child using violence to protect his brother.
And then there are those who've been blessed with the gift of aggression and the overpowering need to protect the flock.
This scene clearly serves as an analogy for Chris's role as a sniper in the Iraq War. He's just using violence to protect people in danger. But if you look at this fight as a metaphor for the Iraq War, the moral justification breaks down. Was beating up this other kid really the only option to protect his brother? And did he really have to continue punching the other kid even after his brother already escaped? Even though the film appears to not take a stance one way or the other on the validity of the war, the narrow focus on the individual totally simplifies the moral grayness of the actual Iraq invasion. Nowhere along the way does it consider that the best way to support the troops is to keep them out of harm's way in the first place, and it never questions whether troops are actually improving the situation in Iraq. The film tries to evoke the same feeling Americans had during World War II. There was good and evil, and we had to fight on the side of good no matter the cost.
I just want to believe in what we're doing here.
Well, there's evil here. We've seen it.
In reality, the Iraq War has much more in common with the moral grayness of Vietnam, because both conflicts have since been seriously questioned all across the political spectrum. So really, American Sniper tries to give a World War II type moral absolutism to a Vietnam War type conflict. And other popular Iraq War films also try redressing the Iraq War with a morally righteous story. Zero Dark 30 is honest about some controversial aspects of the war, but it still avoids questioning the war itself. The film justifies the shocking torture scenes by having the torture result in crucial information about Bin Laden's whereabouts. In reality, America discovered Bin Laden's location from surveillance, not torture, and torture has been routinely questioned as an effective interrogation tactic. Just like American Sniper, this film creates a scenario where the justification for violence appears obvious, but only because the film framed that scenario in a way that overlooks the broader context of the war. Contrast these films with films like Platoon and The Deer Hunter, where the horrors of war crimes are addressed head-on and clearly portrayed as a mistake. Or even World War II films like Saving Private Ryan, where interesting questions do get raised about the justification of their mission. Because World War II and Vietnam War films make moral judgments about their respective conflicts, that honesty allows them to address more interesting questions about war in general. Overall, mainstream Iraq War films focus on specialized experts and their individual experiences in combat. And that focus means that these films rarely address moral issues about the Iraq War as a whole, not to mention they completely overlook the Iraqi perspective. Maybe this is why the genre doesn't have its apocalypse now. If a war film wants to be truly great, it needs to confront the messy reality of the war that it's about. Although most mainstream Iraq War films avoid the messy realities, there are some films that do address American involvement in the Middle East in challenging ways.
What the fuck are you even doing here? Sir! I got lost on the way to college, sir!
Jarhead is a 2005 film about infantrymen in the Gulf War. Though it is about a different war, its time of release, setting, and subject matter make it feel comparable to an Iraq War film. And unlike most Iraq War films, Jarhead does have something insightful to say about American involvement in the Middle East. In the film, Swofford's character satirizes the American fantasy of a morally justified war effort. It feels almost as if Swofford watched American Sniper and got the impression that he could be a hero too. But from the beginning, the film rejects the idea that he's a morally righteous character doing the right thing. He was manipulated into joining the military, he's sickly obsessed with killing,
I wanted the pink mist.
and in the end, he was completely worthless to the war effort.
I never shot my rifle.
After a grueling experience in boot camp and months of waiting in the hot desert, all the soldiers want is to get into battle. But when it finally comes, the enemy retreats almost instantly. American air power easily overpowered the Iraqi army.
Damn, you're too fucking slow. They already retreat.
All right, we can shoot 1,000 yards. To go that far in Vietnam, that'll take a week. World War I, a year. Here, it's gonna take about 10 fucking seconds.
They then spend the rest of the film walking through the carnage wrought by a war that moves too fast for them. And when Swofford finally gets his chance to fire his weapon,
what the fuck frequency are you on?
Oh, fuck.
We got air. I'm calling it in.
Like other Iraq war films, it focuses on the experience of the American soldier. But that experience is not one of duty and honor. It's one of psychological torture. The scars they bring home aren't shown as sacrifices for our freedom. Instead, the film leaves you asking, what was it all for? In one particularly poignant scene, Swofford and his battalion cheer on the flight of the Valkyrie scene from Apocalypse Now, as if it's a football game. But that scene is itself a satire of military heroism. So when they cheer it on, they're obviously missing the point. The film even gets cut off before the explosions start, so they never get their climactic ending. This scene shows the soldiers' failure to even imagine a morally justified conflict. They completely misread the messaging in Apocalypse Now, a film that actually reflects the chaos and pointlessness of the Vietnam War. This scene feels like a commentary on war films in general. It's saying that people who watch war films struggle to see the immorality of war when focusing just on the spectacle of American soldiers in combat. And films like American Sniper and Zero Dark 30 further remove films from reality by creating moral dilemmas that avoid asking the actual tough questions. But Jarhead does capture the true moral ambiguity of the wars in Iraq. In reality, the Gulf War and Iraq War were far more complex, and Jarhead addresses the pointlessness of American involvement in the Middle East instead of relying on a simple support our troops narrative that doesn't really have anything insightful to say about war. Whether you supported the war or were against it, the reality is that many Americans felt like Swofford, watching a war that didn't make sense, completely unable to either help or stand against it.
We are still in the desert.
Jarhead had mixed reviews when it came out in 2005. Though skepticism of the war was high, Americans may have been disappointed with a meandering story without the violent catharsis they thought they would get when they bought their tickets to a war film. But looking back, it might have been ahead of its time. To this day, we are still involved in military operations in the Middle East, with no end in sight. The violence that happens abroad is abstract and removed from the American people. Films like The Hurt Locker and American Sniper represent an escapist desire to create clear lines between good and evil in the Middle East. But the reality is far more complex. There's still plenty of time for more films like Jarhead to come out that bring a more nuanced take on ideas of heroism and violence, and I think they will. But while that happens, we're all still in the desert. If you liked the topic of this video, we also recorded a podcast episode talking more in depth about war movies. Click on the link in the description to listen to it yourself and give us feedback on what you think. And as always, a big thanks to our Patreon supporters who watched this video a week in advance and got early access to the podcast. Thanks for watching.